Hello there, and welcome to another Unity tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to integrate some stamina functionality with the sprint function that I created in one of my previous videos. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. So I've gone ahead and integrated that in our floor is lava game. So you'll see if I start sprinting by holding the left shift button, my character moves faster, and when I let it go, he goes back to normal speed. If I'm holding sprint and then jump, it'll keep that speed in the air until I land. And if I jump and then hold shift, it won't start sprinting until I've landed. So first we'll create the stamina bar. So we need a canvas for this. So of course I've already got one in this project, but if you don't have a canvas, you'll need one with the canvas scaler set to scale with screen size with a reference resolution of 1920 by 1080. The screen match mode set to match width or height, and the match value set to 0.5. I've also got this script attached to the canvas, this GameHUD script, which I've been working on over the last few videos. And we are going to modify this script as well. So let's right click on the canvas in the hierarchy, go to UI and create a new image. And we'll call this image stamina bar BG for background. So this is going to be the background of the stamina bar. I'm going to change my scene view to 2D, and we'll just zoom out so we can see the whole canvas. Okay, so here's my stamina bar, this little white square. So firstly, I want to anchor it to the bottom of the canvas. So in the transform component for the image, I'm going to click on the anchor point. I'm going to hold shift to also set the pivot, and then Alt to snap the position, and I'm going to select the mid-bottom alignment. So it snaps and it's aligned to the bottom of our canvas. Now, I don't want it to hug the bottom of the canvas like it's currently doing. So in the Y position, I'm going to set the Y position coordinate to 50 to just give it a little bit of a buffer from the bottom of the screen. Okay, so next we'll change the size. So I'm going to set the width to 1000, and the height I'm just going to reduce slightly. I'm going to set it to 90, and we'll give it an outline component. So I'm going to hit add component and look up outline, and we'll just make it a little bit thicker. So I'm going to set it to 3 and -3, and now we can see it a bit better. At the moment it's overlaying our overview map, which is fine for while we are editing. But I am going to set this to sit behind the overview map once we are finished. Okay, so next I'm going to set a sprite for the image. So on the image component for the source image, now I don't have a sprite for this currently. We're going to make one in a second. But for now, let's just select the standard background. And you can see that we now have a gray image. Well, it's a gray box, so we can't really see anything but color. But there's an image now sitting in this image component. Now the next thing that I'll do is set the image type to simple, and you'll see that changes how our image is actually rendered. The sprite is now being rendered without any compensation for mismatches between the resolution of our image component and the image file that it's rendering. So we can actually see the resolution of this image of the sprite being rendered down here in the preview. We can see it's 32 pixels by 32 pixels, but our image component has a width of 1000 and a height of 90, which is why there's this stretching. So to compensate for this, we're going to create a custom sprite that matches the resolution of our image component. So I'm using this free Photoshop clone that you can access in your browser called Photopea. You can visit it at photopea.com. And it's very, very similar to Photoshop. It's quite a nifty little tool that we can use to create sprites and 2D assets for our games. So I'm going to hit new project. We'll rename the project. We'll call it Stamina Bar. The width is going to match our image component, so that's 1000 pixels. And the height is going to match our image component as well, which is 90 pixels. The last thing I'll change is I'm just going to change the background color here to transparent, and then create. So here we are. You can see it looks very, very similar to Photoshop. So let's select the brush tool, and we want to increase the size of our brush. So I'm going to press the closing coding bracket key, and maybe a little bit bigger. So we want it to nearly match the edges of our image. And then I'm going to click and hold left shift to draw nice and straight and go nearly to the end. There we go. And we have a little bit of alpha transparency around the edges. And that's all I'm going to do for now, right? Later on, I'll create a better sprite for our stamina bar, but that's going to do for testing purposes. So now I'm going to go up to File, Export As, and then PNG. We can leave all these settings the same. We want maximum quality, make sure the resolution matches our image, give it a name, and then hit save. So here's my Unity project folder. I'm just going to save it directly into that as stamina bar. We'll hit save. So now back in Unity, in our project folder, you can see I've got this stamina bar image asset. Now, we can't actually use this in our stamina bar yet in its default state. It won't let us drop it into the source image. And Unity sort of automatically interprets image files as textures. So we need to change the texture type. So with the image selected in the project window, in the inspector, I'm going to go to the texture type and open that drop-down menu and select Sprite, 2D and UI. We don't need to change any of these settings for this sprite, and we'll hit apply. Now if we select our stamina bar and we try and drag our stamina bar image into the source asset, we can see that it gets displayed and it fits nicely. There's no stretching happening. Now the last thing that I'll do for this image is change the color. So I'm going to click on the color tab here. And this is going to be the background. So I want the background to display red, right? Because the background is like the health that's missing. So we'll change this to a nice red color. Okay, so that's the background for the stamina bar done. So now we need to create the foreground. So let's duplicate our stamina bar background object. So I'll select it in the hierarchy and press Ctrl D. So the next thing we'll do is make the duplicate a child of the stamina bar. And then we'll change the name to stamina bar FG for foreground. Next, we'll change the color to something else. So I'm going to go with like a green color. Yeah, that'll do. Nice. And you can see that our duplicate object overlays the background very nicely. But how do we control how much of the foreground it's showing? So we need to change the image type for the foreground to filled. And now we have all these fill options. So if I drag the fill amount in its default state, you can see we get like a radial fill. And that's not what we want here. We want this to work more like a health bar. So I'm going to change the fill method here to horizontal. And now when I change the slider, you can see when we're at 0, we have no health. And when we are at 1, we have all our health. And we can change the direction. We can just change the fill origin. But I'll stick with going in the left direction. Okay, that's all we need to do for our stamina bars in the UI. Next, we need to edit our GameHUD script so that we can modify the foreground image. So let's open that from the project window. Okay, here's our GameHUD script. So we'll start by adding a new serialized variable, and it'll be private. And it's going to be of the type image, and we'll call it stamina bar. So if it's not recognizing the image type, because you haven't got anything else in this script, make sure you've got the Unity engine.ui namespace at the top there. We'll give this serialized variable a tooltip, and we'll just say a reference to the stamina bar foreground image in the UI for the scene. Now, the only other thing we need to do in this script is create a new method, and it's going to be very simple. It's going to be public, the type void, and we'll call it update stamina fill. And it's going to take a parameter of the type float, and that's going to be our sprint charge. And in here, all we're going to do is we're going to say stamina bar dot fill amount is equal to our sprint charge divided by 1, right? which is going to give us a ratio that's between 0 and 1. And we'll add a method summary for this. And we'll say updates fill amount for the sprint bar foreground image. That'll do. Okay, cool. So let's save the script with Control S. And now we need to modify our player controller. So I'm just going to open it from the Solution Explorer here. There's our player controller script there. And we need to start by creating a couple of serialized variables. So we're going to have a serialized private float, and we'll call it stamina charge ratio and give it a default value of 1. The next will also be a serialized private float, which we'll call stamina deplete ratio. And we'll give this a default value of 1 as well, why not? We're also going to need a couple of hidden private variables. So the first one will be a private boolean, and we'll call it stamina charging and give it a default value of false. The next private variable will be of the type float, and we'll call it current stamina and give it a default value of 1 as well. Then we need another reference variable to our HUD. So it's going to be a private GameHUD, and we'll just call it HUD. Now, as we know with a reference variable, we need to try and find a reference before we try and use it in our script. So here, what we're going to do is we'll say HUD is equal to find object of type GameHUD in our awake function. So at the start of the game, the script's going to loop through all of the objects in the hierarchy until it finds one with the GameHUD script attached to it. Then it's going to store that reference in the HUD variable. So next we need to have a look at the update method. Let's just minimize these other ones. Okay, here we are. So here is the functionality relevant to the sprinting inputs. So what we want to do is we want to associate or toggle the charging functionality with this stuff. So what we're going to do is we'll actually surround all of this in an if statement, and we'll say if stamina charging is equal to false. So I'm going to start it there, and we'll go down to, so we've got 3 sets of if statements that we're enclosing in this, or one if statement, but 3 paths for that if statement. So if stamina charging is equal to false, so if the stamina is not charging, we're going to detect if we're currently sprinting, and release the button this frame, then change our speed back. Now here, we also want to start charging. So we'll say stamina charging is equal to true. So whenever we change the current speed back to the default movement speed, we want to toggle our charging. So in this last pathway for this if statement, that checks if sprinting is equal to true, even if we're not holding down the button or released it, we also want to set charging equal to true. So we'll set stamina charging equal to true here as well. Okay, so that's all we actually need to do for that part of the if statement. Whoops, that bit there. Now, I'm just going to write a comment underneath this where we call the apply movement method. And here, we're just going to say stamina tick. And we'll call a method here that determines whether to decrement or increment our stamina value every frame. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So right underneath our apply movement method is where I'm going to define this. This will be a private method with a void return type, and we'll call it stamina tick. And it's not going to have any parameters. Now we're going to have 2 different ways this method can execute based on whether our stamina is charging or not. So we'll open an if statement to start, and we'll say if stamina charging is equal to false. So here we're going to deplete our stamina. And then we're also going to have an else statement to counter that if statement. And here will be where we charge our stamina. But let's start with depleting the stamina. So here I'm going to check for one condition with 2 parts, because I only want to deplete the stamina under a very specific condition. And that is that the player is sprinting. That's the first part of the condition. They have to be sprinting to deplete the sprinting stamina. And the second part is that they have to be grounded. So if the player has jumped while they're sprinting and they're in the air, I don't want their stamina to be depleted while they are in the air. So let's open an if statement here, and we'll check if sprinting is equal to true. And we want to check another condition here. So we'll use 2 ampersands as the AND operator in C#. And then we're going to check if controller.isGrounded is equal to true. Okay, so if this if statement has executed, we then need to check if we actually have any stamina to deplete. So we'll open an if statement in here, and we'll check if current stamina is greater than 0, because if it's greater than 0, we still have stamina remaining. So if we have stamina remaining, that means we can deplete it. So I'll say current stamina minus equals, and here we're going to say stamina deplete ratio multiplied by time dot delta time. And that's going to decrement our stamina by a very small fraction. Now, after we've actually decremented a value from our current stamina, we need to check if it's equal to or below 0. Because if that's the case, we can't sprint anymore and our stamina needs to begin charging. So we'll open an if statement underneath that, and we'll say if current stamina is less than or equal to 0. And then in this if statement, we're going to do 3 things. We're going to set current stamina back equal to 0. Okay, so it shouldn't ever go below 0. Then underneath that, we'll make sure our stamina charging boolean gets set to true to turn the charging on. Then we'll set our current speed back to our default movement speed. Okay, so underneath that if statement, the last thing we need to do is update our stamina bar. So we'll access our HUD reference and say .update stamina fill. And in here, we'll pass our current stamina value. Okay, so that's the depleting code done. Next, we'll write the code that's going to charge the stamina back up. So here, the first thing we want to check for in this if statement is we want to make sure that our stamina isn't full, because we only want to charge the stamina while there is still stamina to charge. So here we're going to open an if statement, and we'll say if current stamina is less than a value of 1, then we know it's not full, because the maximum value that our current stamina can have is 1. So if there is still stamina remaining to be charged, we can then charge it. So we'll say current stamina plus equals stamina charge ratio multiplied by time dot delta time. So that will increment our current stamina again by a very small fraction. Now, just as we checked if our stamina is below or equal to 0 after decrementing it, after incrementing it, we want to make sure that it's not above our maximum value, which is 1. So underneath that, we'll open an if statement, and we'll say if current stamina is greater than or equal to a value of 1, and we want to do 2 things here. Say current stamina is equal to 1 to make sure it doesn't go above the maximum value. And then we'll set stamina charging back equal to false, because we've reached the maximum value. And underneath that, the last thing we want to do is update our stamina bar. So we'll say HUD.update stamina fill and pass it our current stamina value. Okay, so the last thing to do is replace our comment in the update method. And we're just going to call our stamina tick method every frame. And then I'm going to save the script with Control S, and we can head back into Unity. Okay, so I'm back in Unity now. So first, let's select our canvas in the hierarchy. And on the GameHUD component, the GameHUD script, we need to drag a reference to an image for our stamina bar. So let's drag the stamina bar foreground image into that variable slot. Next, let's select our capsule, our player capsule. And on the player controller script, I'm actually going to set the deplete ratio to 0.5. So by making that value smaller, it means our stamina will deplete more slowly. And by having a higher charge ratio, it means that our stamina will charge faster than it depletes. So let's hit play and try it out. Actually, before I hit play, I'm just going to go back into, go out of 2D mode and just go back to our scene view so we can see what's going on. So, yep, let's hit play. Okay, so we're running. So let's try sprinting. we can see that the stamina depletes. When it gets to the end, it goes back up. So I'm just holding down shift at this point. If, all right, I'll let go. You can see it starts charging back up. So if we deplete it, and then if we try it sprint while it's charging, it doesn't work. We can't sprint while it's charging, okay? So if we sprint and then jump and then let go, it keeps that speed in the air until we land. And if we jump and then hit sprint, it doesn't start sprinting until we actually land on the ground. So that's all we're going to do for this video, just integrating that simple little UI element for our stamina and integrating the stamina with our sprint functionality. If you enjoyed the video and found it useful, please leave a like. And if you'd like to see more game development content and tutorials like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.